So in Habakkuk chapter 2, 6 through 8, it says, will not all these take up a taunt against him, speaking with mockery and derision? Woe to him who amasses what is not his and makes himself rich with many loans. Look at this, guys. Scripture is talking about financial corruption way back in the day, 7th century BC. The Father understood how these things happen and oppression happens financially. Woe to him who amasses what's not his and makes himself rich with many loans. Guys, this is fractional reserve banking. This is what has created such poverty and disruption of the economy in the world today. How long will this go on? Will not creditors suddenly arise and those who disturb you awaken? Then you will become the prey. Right? That verse is literally like the sarcastic underpinning to the movie Fight Club, where they're doing all they can to try to create this little secret project mayhem where they can take down the creditors. I'm not advocating for that at all. I'm just saying that's the natural. When people start to realize they're being conned by the financial institutions, it leads them to want to do stuff. Because you have plundered many nations, the remnant of the people will plunder you. Because of your bloodshed against man and your violence against the land, the city, and all their dwellers. Some interesting conversation going on back in the day. Habakkuk 2, 9 through 13 goes on to say, woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain, to place his nest on high and escape the hand of disaster. What have we been talking about? What did we talk about with the Investigating Babylon series that we showed that the elites announced their plan with Jeff Bezos literally giving a speech about it, how they want people to live in the sky above, and this would be better for the environment on the ground, but they want people to live in the sky above. Now that if you think that they're going to allow people with no money to go live in the sky above, you know, welcome to life. I think you might need to look around a little bit more. That's an abode for the elite. I'm not saying that every person of wealth has done it through unjust gain, but there's a lot of wealth made through unjust gain. And that makes them into a club of, like we talked about before, this breakaway civilization where the elites are at the top and they get the best contracts with the governments. They get the best, positions for bidding on contracts for different things across the world, the multinational corporations. And sometimes, as in the case of the pharmacia corporations, they get subsidized by taxpayer money to make their product, and it's forced on people. This is unjust gain. So Habakkuk says, woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain, to place his nest on high and escape the hand of disaster. What is the point of what they've been saying about the whole global climate change? Is they want to build houses high up because the land is going to be, losing all of its coastlines and undergoing all kinds of horrific ecological changes because of quote unquote climate change. There's nothing new under the sun. It says, you've plotted shame for your house by cutting off many peoples and forfeiting your life. For the stones will cry out from the wall, the rafters will echo it from the woodwork. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by iniquity. It is not indeed from the Lord of hosts that the labor of the people only feeds the fire, and the nations weary themselves in vain. So here we have a direct statement from the prophet Habakkuk, whom is, speaking a message from the Lord, explaining that it is not the will of Yahweh that people would labor to only feed the fire. Like that's it's a little expression to say that your daily activity profits you so little that you basically barely afford to keep yourself warm. Like that's oppression. That's unjust. That's not the way he created life. This is the result of men going after unjust gain. It's crazy.
And then humanity is set for its next chapter in the cosmos. Even though technology won't advance enough for us to see these steps come to fruition, it's up to us to get the project started and make sure we don't kill ourselves along the way.
They're prepping you, folks. They're prepping you for the reveal of the return of Zeus, the dragon, Ra, and he will be in a big sphere, and they're prepping the world to build for possibly a generation, possibly many decades, to get the world used to that, to traversing back and forth quickly to high altitudes where there's livable portions of land that are now being flooded. We talked about that in part 20 of our Investigating Babylon series. And that normalizes the interaction with the return of our progenitor, who's worshipped and revered like a god because of his power and his advanced knowledge. So let's look at what they're proposing to get people ready for the sky dwellings.
Bezos dreams that one day 1 trillion people will live and work in space. But of course, that day is a long way off. To get there, Bezos has unveiled a series of steps, which will lay the foundations for future generations to come, and ultimately lead to giant space colonies, like this one. Bezos calls them O'Neill colonies, after American physicist Gerard Kitchen O'Neill, who first developed the idea.
These are very large structures, miles on end, and they hold 1 million people or more each.
And this structure rotates to induce artificial gravity. And just how big is it? For scale, here's the International Space Station. And these enormous artificial worlds don't just have to be for humans. Some could be national parks. But whatever they're for, Bezos is sure of one thing.
These are really pleasant places to live. Some of these O'Neill colonies might choose to replicate Earth cities. They might pick historical cities and mimic them in some way. There'd be whole new kinds of architecture. These are ideal climates. These are shirt sleeve environments. This is Maui on its best day all year long. No rain, no storms, no earthquakes. What does the architecture even look like when it no longer has its primary purpose of shelter?
Admittedly, doesn't that sound pretty great? Sure, but how practical is it to have entire companies dedicated to advancing human civilization in space? And even according to Bezos,
those entrepreneurial companies cannot exist today. It's impossible. And the reason is the price of admission to do interesting things in space right now is just too high because there's no infrastructure.
And that's where his space company Blue Origin comes in. First, it's working on launching and building reusable rockets like New Shepard and New Glenn, which are projected to drastically cut the cost of launching payloads into space. And secondly, Bezos wants to start pulling resources from the moon.
One of the most important things we know about the moon today is that there's water there. It's in the form of ice. It's in the permanently shadowed craters on the poles of the moon. And water is an incredibly valuable resource. You can use electrolysis to break down water into hydrogen and oxygen, and you have propellants.
Okay, so how do you extract lunar water? You go to the moon and you mine it, ideally with this, Blue Moon.
We've been working on this lander for 3 years. It's a very large lander. It'll soft land in a precise way, 3.6 metric tons onto the lunar surface.
Space companies like Blue Origin, SpaceX, Boeing, and NASA are all pioneering the next generation of space exploration, whether it's humans on the moon by 2024 or colonies on Mars by the 2030s. One thing is certain, the 21st century space race is here.
Stop the cap. Stop the cap right now. Stop the cap.
Yeah, all lies, guys. In fact, you just watched a 2.5 minute presentation for investor fraud. It's amazing what these guys can claim and get away with, and then ask for money and take investors and just fleece people of this crazy money. In fact, Jeranism does a great job in the past where he would go on to like Indiegogo and Fiverr and look at all the quote unquote homemade rocket space programs, small company space programs that wanted to launch their own rocket. These people are just getting millions of dollars in investment for their fundraiser, and then never any update on the program. Never, obviously, don't go to space. Never any update on the rocket, and then but yet Fiverr and Indiegogo and those types of, they're not taking those fundraisers down. They're letting more come up. They're just fleecing the people. Fleecing. Yeah, it's crazy. So, but like I said before, here's what they're going to be doing as they prep the world, as we're seeing with modern media, science, movies, TVs, they're prepping the world to welcome back Zeus and Ra, whom they're going to say is the panspermia, the alien who seeded life on the earth and left. And they want the world to be accepting of that because they must have the space narrative for this to work. And they don't want you to think that we've already always had this technology. So like we talked about the Vimanas in the Investigating Babylon series, we're going to go into the counter narrative they want to put out so that you don't think that that's something that's already been here in the past. This is why they don't teach you about Vimanas in school, not even in college.